Hi everyone, this is Avikshit Bhushan. I'm the Regional Director Asia Pacific for Aerospike. For today's session, Preventing Fraud at Grab, it's my pleasure to introduce Srinivas Chamarthi and Raghavendra Nagaraj from Grab. Srinivas is the Head of Engineering, Merchant Payments, Risk and Compliance at Grab. And prior to this, he was working at Flipkart as the Director of Engineering for Pricing and Promotions. Srinivas has deep expertise in scaling and building distributed, highly performant products and applications in the e-commerce space. Raghavendra works as a principal engineer at Grab. He has been working on scaling Grab fraud service to serve hundreds of thousands of requests per second. With that introduction, and without further ado, let me hand this over to Srinivas.
Hi there, Avik. It's a pleasure to be here. So let's get going on this one today. So preventing fraud at Grab. There are so many things that we think of when we say fraud and when we're talking about all these online transactions. But let me take a step back and just talk about what we at Grab are and what we think of. Our culture and our principles put our customers first. Outserve our customers is a principle that we live by. And when we stepped into the payments domain, whether it be P2P or rewards or insurance or anything else, it is our responsibility as Grab to ensure that customers can transact with confidence and we maintain our credibility of making it a safe environment. For us, the real currency of digital transactions is trust of the customers on Grab. And our platform is built to ensure we are able to maintain that trust. Just look at the numbers that come out year over year, all the things that we look at. Online fraud rose almost 50% last year. It's estimated that for every dollar lost to fraud, we end up losing up to $3 in indirect costs as an organization. When it comes to online engagement, 75% of businesses are interested in more advanced security measures. And we are at the helm of what we think is fraud levels. At the same time, businesses understand that customers take comfort in the security measures that they already have in place for digital transactions. Guess this, an estimated 73% of enterprises report some sort of suspicious activity on transactions. Threat detection and fraud prevention will increase customer loyalty and reduce risk. So here at Grab, we built a risk platform that enables us to process millions of events in near real time, detect and take action to prevent losses and increase trust of our customers. Today, we'll be talking about how and what went into building such a large-scale system that listens to millions of events from multiple sources, be it taxi, rewards, P2P, or all the other systems at Grab that are customer-facing, and how we built it to cater to our needs of high scale, high availability, and low latency to provide a seamless experience for our customers. Just think of one more small data point that we will look at. Ideally, an application gets 750 milliseconds to about a second to decide whether or not an event or transaction is fraudulent. Within this time span, a user profile and the transaction made has to be validated according to the rules set by the system. A single request, more often than not, leads to several database lookups. In such a situation, latency is the key. So how did we do this? Let's look at that. Grab fraud service. Now, just imagine what we were dealing with and where we were coming in from. And here I will say that Grab, being one of the most popular super app in Southeast Asia, has a huge presence in payments, taxi, food, wallet, you name it. And there are certainly some bad actors at play, using fraud attacks, trying to use stolen credit cards, gaming the rewards, things of that sort. There are potential loss of millions of dollars due to chargebacks, legal and reputational harm, and potential loss of wallet license, fines, and more importantly for us, the user trust loss. That set out in making us go and build an in-house fraud service. As a part of the fraud service, we were looking at what are all the requirements that we had, what is that we need to build, what are our core requirements, why do we need it? Then we realized how entire Grab and all of its platforms and microservices need this particular service and how it's going to listen to them. So we built this service that is used across Grab for all platforms. It listens to all the verticals and systems for events that are processed. A rules engine and an aggregations as a service that will be more in a componentized, externalizable way. A real-time rule editor with velocity rules, ML models, and static features like 3DS responses from gateways and BIM. device level verdicts, and location based rules. Now, when we look at that, where are we going with for our benefits? Our customer, as I said, was our front seat, our safeguards and cost savings. Customer, obviously, it was the increased user trust, safeguards on reputational harm or bad press, legal action and fines, card scheme actions, fraudulent gaming of rewards, and cost savings. There's a vendor cost that's involved and certainly a lot of chargebacks that might come through. So what we'll do is, Raghav will now go through how we re-architected our system while we moved away from external vendors as our fraud system matured to solve for our requirements and, of course, our challenges while doing so. Raghav?
Thanks, Srinivas. Thanks, Avikshit, for the introduction as well. So as Srinivas mentioned earlier, we cater to different kinds of businesses. We have P2Ms where people can send money to their friends and families. P2Ms where people can send a merchant by scanning a QR code or entering his phone number, or people can take a taxi ride. They can book. They can pay their bills online, like mobile bills or any of the utility bills for that matter. And the list is endless, basically. So Grab serves all of those. And as a fraud detection engine, we need to serve all these businesses so that we are protected from fraud. So as you can see on the right side, we have this is the original state of the system. When we started this. So we have all wallet related activities, and then all taxi related activities. All those come to our app servers. We would try to figure out if the current transaction is fraudulent or not, and then in order to figure out whether a transaction is fraudulent or not, we'll have to come up with some sort of aggregates to say that the user has done X transactions in the last 1 hour or Y transactions in the last 1 day, or so on and so forth. The number of such use cases is literally endless. So what we did was we used to store these aggregates in MySQL as the permanent backup store, and then Redis was serving the most recently. It was used as a cache, basically, right? And then our analysts used to pull this data from MySQL and then put it in our Presto pipeline for further analysis purpose. So when we denied or allowed a transaction to go through, the respective systems would push the transactions to through a Kafka service, and then we would use them, and then we would go through them, aggregate them, and then put the data back in MySQL and Redis, right? So this was the original state of the system. We knew that we have to come up with something. The go-to-market was really important at the time when we started this off. So we didn't have much thought about it, and then we knew that we had to change this architecture so that it scales much better. But then just to make sure that we don't lose out on the fraud capabilities, we started building the system. And then also at the same time, we started using our vendors, one of the third-party vendors, to make sure that we check fraud. But then the list of challenges that we faced were quite a bit, in fact. So we hit up a state where we could not scale beyond 30 to 40 TPS on a normal day. A particular type of a transaction, we would need to run at least hundreds of rules, and these hundreds of rules would have thousands of different variables as aggregations associated with them. And then we needed a throughput of at least 1,000 to 1,500. We needed to support this kind of throughput of 1,000 to 1,500 transactions per second. And then the biggest problem came when we were about to hit this scale, and we knew that we are going to hit it at some point of time. So we started early, and then the adaptability of our service also came into picture. So we needed to support a new country every other day, or maybe a new type of transactions as and when we added them. And then it led to a lot of maintenance as well. So the Redis cost went on going up. So that's one of the reasons as well, because when we started storing this data in Redis as a caching, since Redis is not it doesn't support very good user-defined data types. So we had to stick with marshalling this data in JSON and then store it. But then later we realized that, we're hitting the network IO bandwidth. So we had to upscale our instances. We need to get more memory as well in place so that, we can store much more data in the meantime. So we as a patch, we kind of compressed the data and started storing it, but it only delayed the inevitable for a while. And then we faced quite a few technical challenges as well in scaling this. So all in all, the bottom line was that we needed to move to the new system that we intended to do much faster. So then we started doing this. So just to give a very high level and brief introduction about what our architecture currently is. As you can see, there are a lot of transaction types that we serve as of today. This is not an exhaustive list, but just for representational purpose, we've mentioned a few. So all the wallet activities based on activities based on wallet, like P2Ps, P2Ms, top-ups, and then loyalties, rewards. We started doing the lending business as well, giving micro loans to the drivers and the packs. And then we recently started investment as well. And then we have insurance, and the biggest of them all, taxi bookings. So we needed to serve this and much more. And as we knew that the scale at which we need to work was not supported by the existing system, so we needed to move to this. We didn't change a lot of things in the existing system because we knew that they would scale up when we wanted to, but then the core aggregation service is the one which we needed the most help in. So just to give a very brief about how the the whole thing works, taking on from the previous slide that I showed, we have an elastic load balancing mechanism put on top of our app servers. All our app servers, all our workers, and everything is written in Go language. We make use of gRPC quite extensively to talk to the other services, external services, and internal services as such. So one such service could be a user service using which we can get the packs information or the merchant information to get the KYC levels of the packs and so on and so forth. We run quite a few machine learning models as well. They also are deployed as different services, so we need to integrate with them as well. And then to modularize our system so that we become more robust, we carved out the rule engine part into a separate service. We named it Griffin. We have a blog about how Griffin works as well on our engineering blog. And then I'll just briefly touch upon Aerospike and timescale aggregation as a service. Now we'll talk more about that in the coming slides. Our transactional related data and mostly audit related data goes into MySQL. And on the worker side, as you can see, we have just listed out a couple of them. This is also not an exhaustive list of Kafka services that we are actually listening to. One of the interesting services is a device stream. We have an SDK integrated with our app. So that streams data to our servers, and then we figure out quite a lot of information about a particular device being used and the kind of app that they're using. So one of the use cases could be, we check whether a user is using a rooted device or not, or we can check if the user is using an emulator or so on and so forth. I guess we produce a lot of such verdicts based on the information that we get out of this SDK. That comes in the device stream, and the throughput is quite high on that as well. And then we obviously have the transaction streams coming in from various transaction systems like wallet, loyalty, as I mentioned before. So we consume all these transactions in our workers. They are simple Go applications which keep on consuming from Kafka. All in all, we generally consume on an average day, we consume around 12 to 15 million transactions in a day. That keeps on going up as well. So that on an average, yeah, we consume around 15 million transactions. So the worker applications, they consume all these, and then they do the aggregations. They put the aggregations in Timescale and Aerospike, and Yeah, and then so that's their job. And we use Grafana and Kibana for monitoring and logging, that's like an industry standard. Yeah, so moving on to our rules engine that we carved out of the system. So it's called Griffin. It has two components. One is a rule editor, and then there is a rule engine. Um, Analysts can write rules on the rule editor. The rules are valid Python expressions. So as you can see, we've just given an example of what a rule could look like. This is one of the simplest rules that we have. Say, for example, the sender 3DS authenticated response is yes, and then offered was also yes, and then the transaction amount is greater than 0. And this over a period of uh, a daily or monthly or whatever it could be. If this is greater than 0, then we can potentially deny a transaction. So this is one of the simplest rules. One of the complicated rules could also be like, we have a use case where people used to collude with the merchants. So in order to just game the system to get the reward points that we offer, we would offer some reward points per transaction at a particular merchant. So because of user collusion, what used to happen was that merchants, users rather, who sit at a different place would try to make a transaction at a merchant who's far away from him. So just to give an example of that, we can just compute a Haversine distance between the merchant and the user, and then try to figure out approximately if they are really within a radius of something within each other. And then if it's more than what our threshold is, we can still possibly deny the transaction. So all that could be achieved within a simple rule using a Python expression. So that's one of the main reasons that why we chose Python for this use case. And then on top of it, we've made available the various packages that are available in Python, so using something like mathlib or datetime, for example. So using that, our analysts can write rules depending on various strategies that they use. So what happens is that every rule in every transaction type has something called a schema to which every request need to adhere to. So assuming that we have a number of rules per transaction type, we would define a schema in a certain way, and then whenever we need to evaluate a particular transaction, we would generate a schema object in that format and then send it across to JSON Griffin rule engine, and Griffin rule engine would use that schema and execute these rules, and then it gives us the output of the rule. The output of the rules are called predictions, and they can be of any user defined types. Generally, you would do something like allow or deny or send an email. So under some scenarios, we might need to send an email to our analysts so that they can get notified about a potential fraud, but we might not necessarily act upon it at that instant of time by disallowing the transaction. We would still let it go, but then we would go back and then analyze whether we should have denied this transaction or not. So something of that sort. So this is our rule engine that we've built. Moving on. So here comes the part where we needed the most of the changes from the existing systems that we had. So the aggregations as a service, as I mentioned before, it was primarily driven through MySQL using a JSON column, and then Redis for caching purpose. It served its purpose for a while, but then as we expected it to fail, it started giving us problems in terms of scalability, in terms of maintenance, and all the other aspects that I spoke about earlier. We have quite a few complex aggregations done as well. Apart from just simple counters like how many transactions have happened between a pair of users or within the last X minutes, we at some point of time we even go up to just a minute to figure out how many transactions have happened between a pair, or it could be 10 minutes or 30 minutes. It could be anything very it could vary across time. So the smallest that we support is a minute, and then the largest that we support is the entire lifetime of the user. But however, having said that, storing so much of data is not such a worthy effort. So we've chunked that into multiple time buckets. Say for the last 48 hours, we would give any arbitrary time window. But then for anything above that, say something like a daily or a monthly limit. So what we tend to do is to give at a daily level or a monthly level. So if you want last 60 days, maybe we might not do the aggregate, but if you want last 2 months of aggregates, we would we would have 2 calendar months of aggregates. So this more or less solves our problems. And on top of it, quite complicated aggregates could be something like say we do some sort of bucketing, say how many transactions have happened within a transaction amount range of say 10,000 Indonesian rupiah to 20,000, or maybe 20,000 to 50,000, or so on and so forth. So that's one of the aggregates. And we have a use case for number of distinct users who have transacted at a merchant level. Say in case of merchants who have quite a few transactions, we've seen transactions worth 50,000 transactions at a day, or even more than that, maybe 100,000 transactions at a day level as well. So in order to figure out how many unique senders have sent money to a particular merchant over a day or two, and across hundreds of thousands of transactions, it becomes really difficult. So we've kind of cracked that using Aerospike. So that's one good thing about this implementation. And then on top of it, there could be various other aggregation levels also. Say for example, let's take top up for example, where a top up is defined as putting money into the wallet of the user. So when we're putting money into the wallet, it has a lot of components to it, right? So there is a card involved, there's a user involved, there's a location involved, there's a device involved, and even the card has multiple attributes. Like a card will have a fingerprint. A fingerprint is defined as, since we are not, for regulatory purposes, we are not supposed to store the actual card number as it is. We kind of compute a one-way hash out of it, and then we save that as a fingerprint of the card, so that we have a one-to-one mapping between a card and a fingerprint. And then there is a card bin, which is the first 6 digits of a card, which generally represents the bank that has issued the card. And then the device which the user is using, as I mentioned before, the device ID that we generate out of this of our device service, that gives us the device level aggregates. And then we have IP based aggregates. So what we also do is some sort of geo hashing, where we define a certain radius or a block of locations, and then we figure out how many transactions have happened within this block, because a location is too granular to compute something, to calculate anything on top of. So we kind of go up a little bit, and then we do a geohash of say a radius of 2 kilometers or something of that sort, which is configurable obviously. And then now, using all these different data points, we come up with aggregates. Say everything has a combination of with a user and at the other data point level. Say for example, if we take a card bin and a user, for example, card bin and user aggregates are one set of aggregates, but then how many transactions have happened on the card bin itself is another set. So that doesn't involve the user, but it's just the number of transactions that have happened across users. Similarly, for card fingerprint, say how many transactions have happened between this user and the fingerprint, and at a broader level of fingerprint as well, or maybe a geohash, or maybe a device. So this is just a few of the use cases that we have that I'm mentioning over here. So when you consider the kind of complexity in terms of the number of aggregates that we have, and at the same time considering the amount of time that we can afford to take in computing all those aggregates, in evaluating hundreds of rules, thousands of variables for each transaction type. So the response time from the DB, the layer that we are storing the data, becomes of utmost importance. So we had to kind of pick and choose between the databases. So we knew that it's not going to be an easy exercise for us. So we needed to figure out something which works for all sorts of use cases. So we started off with a couple of databases, and then we ended up with Timescale DB, as I mentioned, which is a plugin on top of Postgres. Postgres has been one of the very widely well received open source data RDBMSs. It conforms to SQL standards, and it has a lot of time series. Timescale has built a lot of time series based features on top of it, like time bucketing, gap filling, aggregations, grouping, and all those things. So we kind of started using that, and then obviously we started using Aerospike as well. So just to give a brief, I probably spoke a little bit about Timescale in the previous slide itself. It's an open source tool for analyzing time series data. So since it's built on top of Postgres, we have the flexibility of a full SQL. So essentially we can create views, we can create joins, we can create indexes on any data set that we want to, and then so basically it has all the features of Postgres, plus on top of it, it does time series data analysis, gap filling, aggregations, as I mentioned, and then it partitions. The beauty of this is it partitions data by time and space. So the way it works is it calls, so there's this terminology called hypertable, using which it stores the data. So it chunks the data into a time bucket, so that, say, let's assume that we give a time bucket of 7 days, which is the default time interval in Timescale. It creates a table every 7 days, every 7 calendar days. And then the idea is that, as we chunk the data into multiple partitions, and the time series use case is mostly append only. We don't generally go back and update the data, so you don't have to move the data so much. And because of this, the amount of data that we always need to look at will always be very small in size, which means that the data can actually fit in memory. Now, if the data can fit in memory, that's the fastest way of aggregating or doing any manipulation on top of it, right? So that's the whole idea of this. And then if we manage to keep the indexes small enough for us to query using those indexes, and those indexes can fit in memory, then that's the best thing that can be done. So using Timescale, we figured out that for a lot of more recent use cases, we have rolling window kind of aggregations required. Say, for example, we need to look at last 30 minutes of transactions of a user. Last 30 minutes, if you want 30 minutes, obviously it is a rolling window which changes every minute. So aggregating this in Aerospike would have definitely worked. We even benchmarked that. It works beautifully well. But then, because of the complexity of us purging the data manually, and at the same time keeping the number of keys in check, also meant that we didn't want to do this in Aerospike, as we would just increase the number of writes and reads unnecessarily on Aerospike. So we figured, and on top of this, we needed some sort of time series aggregations, like standard deviations, the averages, the moving averages, and things like that. So we decided to go ahead with a proper time series implementation for this. But then we also needed this for the last couple of days or so. So we decided that, since the data doesn't change much after a couple of days, rather it doesn't change at all after a couple of days, we decided to have a granularity of a day level in Aerospike, and everything else would be dynamically read from Timescale. So coming to the Aerospike part. As I mentioned, we have daily, monthly, yearly, and lifetime level of aggregates in Aerospike. Um, initially when we started off with Enterprise Edition 4.5 using the hybrid memory architecture where we had index on disk and the data would be stored, index in memory and data would be stored on the disk. And then we used nested maps with atomic map increment operations. So what we would do in this scenario is that, just to give a brief about how would a key and a record would look like, I've just given an example over here. The format of this key is that, the from user ID, the to user ID, and the status and the currency of the transaction. So this means that, say, let's assume we take a P2P transaction where a person would send money to his family and friends. The from and the to user ID would be the sender and the receiver in this transaction, and then the status of the transaction, and then the amount of money that was transferred between the pair given that duration. So in the record we would have 3 or 4 bins. So the first bin is actually for a day level. It means it is for April 1st 2020. A is the amount and C is the count. Amount is the total sum of money that was transferred between the pair, and then it was rather transferred from 1 2 3 4 5 2 9 8 7 6 5, and count is the number of such transactions. 2004 is for April, and then for yearly we would just have a bin called 20, and then a lifetime transactions of this user. So this is what we started off with in Aerospike. Just to give a very high level metrics on what we have currently. Our P99 latencies on both Aerospike and Timescale have not gone beyond 2 milliseconds at any point of time. Although we see occasional spikes of 5 to 6 milliseconds, those are maybe once or twice in an hour or 2 hours or so, something like that. So we can so generally the P99 latency has always been within 1 to 2 milliseconds, mostly within 1 millisecond. On Timescale we have seen a millisecond extra because it has to do a lot of extra work as well. And then we process, as I said, we benchmarked it for around we benchmarked Aerospike for around 80K transactions on our cluster that we had, and we could do that with around 50 to 60% of average CPU utilization across the cluster. And then we benchmarked it for a write throughput of 20K transactions per second, but we at the moment we have around 2K transactions per second. Our memory usage on Aerospike is around 50 to 60 gigs, and we have around 800 GB to 1 terabyte of disk utilization as of now. And on Timescale, I think we benchmarked it on a single slave node to have to give us a throughput of around 60 to 70K per second. So as and when we add more slaves, we can certainly get more throughput out of it. So just to come back to the the various other databases that we tried out for this, we tried out Influx, we tried out Elasticsearch, we tried out ScyllaDB, we tried out Cassandra, we tried out CouchDB. So we did quite a bit of extensive research on what suits our use case, and then finally we came up with Aerospike and Timescale. Influx has the cardinality issue. When we have a lot of when the cardinality increases, the performance quite decreases by quite a bit, and there's no good secondary index support on that. And on Elasticsearch, although we were very skeptical in the beginning about whether it would even work for our use case or not, and as it turns out that it didn't actually fit our needs, since it's more of a search engine rather than an aggregation engine, although we just wanted to give it a shot to see if it can actually fit the bill. But then we also looked at ScyllaDB, which is a drop-in replacement for Cassandra written in C++. At that time, there were no secondary index support, and then the counters had a huge limitation that that it had to be integers, and at the same time you could not have something another column of some other data type as well in the table. So it kind of and on top of it, it has a lot of maintenance aspects as well. And Aerospike we have been running for almost a year now, and so far, apart from adding new boxes to the cluster, I don't think we have done any maintenance activity so far on Aerospike. So that's a very good point for us from a maintenance point of view. Yeah, so and on top of it, so on Timescale we have around 2 terabytes of data stored, and Aerospike has a terabyte of data. So now I guess we have around 500, roughly around 500 million keys in Aerospike as of now. We've been able to just add boxes and then make it work as we expect it to, but then we know that it's not going to be sufficient. I mean, the design that we have is not going to be sufficient in terms of we want to be more efficient in terms of storage as well as retrieval. So what we are trying to do is to reduce the number of keys by this nesting these values. So thankfully Aerospike has come up with a new feature in which we can go to an nth level in a nested map and then increment. So we've just started work on this, and by our estimate, it should reduce the number of keys by at least by 40%. So which should be around 300 million if we were to deploy the code today. So all in all, Aerospike and Timescale have been working so far pretty good for us. Yeah, I think I've mostly done. Avikshit. So.
Thank you, Raghavendra and Srinivas. That was an excellent presentation.
Sure.
So folks attending this session, thank you very much for having joined this. Unfortunately, Srinivas and Raghavendra won't be available to take your questions. But if you can post them, what we'll do is we'll get them to answer your questions tomorrow. So thank you very much, everyone.